you forgive us for the sins and are in the work of restoring us to your righteousness and your image. We thank you for that. Be with me now as I talk about my life a little bit, Lord, and may it glorify you. We thank you for your love for us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, give me 1 second here. So, who am I? Well, yeah, that's me at 3 years old. March 25th, 1964, when I was born. What do I think when I see this? What an uncomfortable shirt. Isn't that the way it was? I mean, it used to be that way, right? All the stuff they would dress you up in for pictures, it's always uncomfortable. You couldn't wait to get out of it, right? And I was born in a family of 5. This was taken from my brother's graduation day. You like those candy striped pants I have on? And that tie, look at the size of that tie. It goes halfway down. If you look behind us, you'll see that's our house. And it's not really evident by looking at it, but I tried to find a picture that I couldn't. But those little windows behind my sister and brother and my father are a garage door. My house was actually a converted garage. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Where was my home? I'm going to use Google Earth here to show you a little bit. There's the United States, and you can see up next to the Great Lakes, there's that tag there, and as we get closer in New York State, you can see Lake Erie to the left there, and as we zoom in, that is the Allegheny Mountains. Allegheny State Park is part of it, and that run that you see, that road going across the majority of it, is called Sawmill Run Road. That is actually my house at right there in the center. That off to the right, kind of a lightish blue color. Now this is not what this is not how I grew up. That building as you look to the left there of my house was my father's shop that was built when I was 16. So before that, there was a house which was about half the size that it is now. It was, like I said, it was a converted garage at the time. My father was born June 13th, 1929. Robert Alfred Bantin. He was born in Mineral Wells, Texas. Very studious man. He looks there on the left, that was my father. He was very studious. And one of the things that was interesting to hear at his death, at his funeral, memorial, was the number of people that lived up our road that considered him to be one of the smartest men that they've ever met in their life, right? And he's well studied. Every night as I would go to bed, I would see him and he'd be reading. He's a continual reader, right? Read everything he could that was real, never fiction. It was always anything. I mean, he was an expert welder, so he was always studying metallurgy and the latest things and stuff like that, and science and all that stuff. His dad, in the middle there, is Alfred Bantin. I don't know where he was born. His mother's name was Laura. I could not find a picture of her to put up. It's kind of a tragic story in my life. They lived 5 miles from us. We lived out in the country. They lived in the township city of Salamanca. I saw them maybe a total of 10 times when I was growing up, even though they were close. But there was a division in the family, and my father refused to visit them because of some of the things that were happening and some things that happened. My father was not treated properly in the house. I wouldn't say he was abused physically or anything like that, but definitely emotionally abused. My grandfather there in World War II, he flew a P-51 Mustang over the European theater. He was an atheist, self-proclaimed atheist. He was also a 32nd degree Mason. if any of you know what that means. My uncle there on the right, my Uncle Richard, I called him Uncle Dick, he and my father, when my father was 10 years old, were invited to a church in Texas. And they went to the Sunday school to the church, and they kind of enjoyed it. The next week they went, they were given a note, and it said, if you can't afford the 25 cents for materials, we need to make room for someone else. And that was the last time my father voluntarily went into a church because of that. Because his father was like, see, that's what it's all about. It's all about money, right? It was devastating. My father never set foot in a church until his 50s, voluntarily. He went to funerals and weddings and that sort of thing, but besides that, he did not. My father was drafted at the age of 19 into the Korean War. Even though he was a self-proclaimed pacifist, that he didn't have a church or an institution to attach his pacifism to, so it didn't count. You could claim yourself a pacifist, but if you didn't have an organization supporting your claims, then it wasn't accepted. So he was drafted over to Korea. As he was getting off the ship, as the story goes, the sergeant in charge was handing out rifles, and my father, when they threw the rifle to him, he put his arms down, he wouldn't catch it, hit him in the chest, and fell to the ground. And they said, "What's wrong with you, soldier?" And he said, "I refuse to kill." And they told him, "You kill them or we'll kill you." That was what they told him. And after his wartime, I remember I was 13, and I had heard, I was being learned about the wars and stuff like that. Very patriotic presentation at the time. And I went home to my father, and I said, Dad, I just learned about the Korean War and everything happened. It was a grand story in the textbook. And I said, "How many gooks did you kill?" Well, that was the first time my father ever struck me in the face. But he hit me with his backhand, knocked me on the ground, and looked at me with horrible eyes and said, "Don't you ever ask me that again." Right. So that's the kind of background or damage that my father had in his life, right? So his hatred for the government, for making him do that, because that's what he had determined, and also Freemasonry. Those of you who know Masons, he was very against the Masons because he saw that as part of what's going on in the world. As a child, I learned more about secret societies than I ever wanted to know. His sibling, his younger brother there, joined the Masons when he was older. And he and his brother formed a business after the war. They formed a business, a Triumph motorcycle dealership, where they dealt with a lot of different British motorcycles and things like that. But in the other half of the business was a body shop. So he worked as a body man. I got some funny stories with that as well. Dad would come home at night, and we'd be sitting around the kitchen. Mom always had supper ready when Dad came home. That was part of the traditional thing, right? So Dad would come home, and he'd walk by us on the table, and he'd blow his nose, and he'd say, "What color car do you think I painted today?" And then he'd open up the Kleenex, it was red. Anyways, that was kind of the thing with my father. He had very dry sense of humor. He was very funny. So when I was 16, my father started his own business because he and his brother had broken up, and because of family issues and that sort of thing. And it was called Universal Services, and that's that building that was built up beside our house. My brother was in DeMolay, and DeMolay is like Pathfinders is to Adventism, DeMolay is to Freemasonry. So my brother became a Masonic youth. My mother joined the Eastern Star, which is like the women's auxiliary to the Freemasons. So needless to say, there was conflict in our home. Because my father was dead set against it, and the rest of my family seemed to be with it and for it. My mother, Vivian Rosler, or as they say in Germany, Rossler. Vivian Rosler, born August 3rd, 1932, in Little Valley, New York, which is where our home is. In fact, she was born a half a mile where I was raised, half a mile from where I was raised. So, her siblings, I'm fortunate to get this picture. My Uncle Fred, which we'll get to in a minute, is on the lower left. Then there's my mother on the lower right, and above her is my Aunt Bev, and to the upper left is my Aunt Barb, who is still alive today, 94 years old. And in the middle is my great-grandmother Hall. So that's a cool picture there. The stories you hear most about in my family are about my Uncle Fred, because he was my uncle that was a toothless hillbilly. I had to warn my wife about him as we went to visit the first time. I said, "Don't be surprised if he licks you in the face," and he certainly tried to. It's toothless. So, welcome to the family. Put you over his shoulder, right? Carry you around a little bit and say, "Welcome." You know, that was my Uncle Fred, right? He was a real hillbilly. This here was my my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side. My grandfather there in that picture was 380 pounds and 6'3". He was he had his own farm that he did part-time, and then he walked the railroad as his full-time job. And boy, do we have some stories about that. But my grandmother, on the right there, is Gladys Rosler. She was Gladys Hall. She actually won an award for the longest-serving member in the Red Cross in New York State. So she was 4'10" and 120 pounds. He was 6'3" and 380 pounds. So the two of them together was really kind of funny in itself, right? My grandmother, at age 82, went up in the woods. We lived in the hills and valleys. She went up in the woods and shot herself a 6-point buck, brought it down and dressed it herself. She loaded a cord of wood, split it, and put it in the basement. And this is all when she was 82. You know, she would walk 4 miles a day. She had a route that she would walk. She was a very healthy woman. And she always carried a shotgun. Well, not always, but I mean, she was like, you ever watch Beverly Hillbillies? I can remember my cousin was 10 at the time, and I was 11, and they had a long driveway, and toward the end of the driveway, there was a creek with a bridge over it. And we were laying on that bridge one day, and down below in the creek, we saw a spotted adder, right? So we yelled, Grandma, spotted adder. So she runs inside, grabs the 12-gauge shotgun, comes out on the bridge, and boom! This wave comes out of the creek. Anyways, that was my grandma. Yeah. My father and mother. This is kind of a funny picture here because we didn't have any pictures of my parents for the longest time, and so for a gift, Amy and I took them to a place to get photos, and my dad, for the first time in years, put on a suit. Well, he had gained some weight, and he was supposed to be sitting in front, but because the suit was so stretched, the buttons were ready to pop, that they decided to take the picture this way. Anyways, that's my mom and dad. No wedding pictures. I think I was 14 or 13 when my sister got married, and I saw her wedding album. And I turned to my parents and I said, "Hey, where are your wedding pictures? I've never seen any." They kind of looked at each other, looked at me, and said, "We don't have any." I was like, I'm thinking, "You're not married?" They said, "No. After the war, my father went and picked her up, and they drove to Virginia and saw the Justice of the Peace and got married. They eloped." So it's kind of an interesting story. They upgraded the house while I was in the Air Force. Now it's no longer a garage door, and they also extended it about 15 feet towards you there. It's on 40 acres. The foothills of the Alleghenies. That hill behind looks short, but it has a 450-foot vertical. And that field behind there, it doesn't look that steep, but that was one of the best sliding hills that you can imagine. In the winter, go sliding on that. It was really great. One thing our area was known for was its snow. Right? I had a buddy that was in the Air Force that was from about 60 miles south of us in Pennsylvania. And for Christmas, he decided to take leave with me. And I told him I'd come down and get him. We'd go skiing. Because I worked at a ski resort previously and stuff. And so we were going to go up and go skiing here in New York. And the day I went down to get him, he said, "You guys don't have enough snow." I said, "There's a storm coming tonight." And he says, "What does that mean?" I said, "That means there'll be enough snow." He said, I said, "We only got like 12 inches, and so there's some bare spots and stuff, so it hasn't been a heavy winter. But this is a normal Lake Erie, lake effect snow that's going to come." And sure enough, we got, this was the next day. Right? We'd had 14 inches overnight. And that was actually the average snowfall per storm. We'd get, average storm carried with it 14 inches of snow. Another thing, I did a study when I was in 8th grade, and it was on the weather of Western New York and where we lived. We got an average of 190 inches of snow a year. And it was funny to watch the weatherman from Buffalo, because what happens off the lake is you have what they call banding, where you have these little weather systems develop on the edge of the lake, where you have a band of snow, nothing, a band of snow and nothing, a band of snow and nothing. So the weatherman got up, I can remember this particularly because I come home from the Air Force and I was watching the weather. He says, "It's going to be banding tonight, 3 to 30 inches, just matters where you're at." Right? So you could drive 5 miles and nothing, and then 5 miles and be in the middle of the 30 inches, right? Because the way it's set up, it's really kind of interesting. Yeah, that's the inside of our house. And again, that's the garage door behind us there. That was our living room. Now, the reason why this happened is because my father in 1962 had figured out a design for a house that had a 2.5-car garage, a breezeway, and then a 4-bedroom home. When he started constructing the house, New York State raised their property taxes by 110% in 1 year. And he said, "Nope, ain't going to happen. We're going to live on what we have." So he stopped building and converted our garage into a home. Here's an interesting one. I was a young kid, and I had a banana bike. Do you guys remember banana bikes? It had a 3-speed stick shift on it. That was the coolest thing for me as a kid. And that TV behind my father there, you can barely see it, with the dial on it. We got channels 2 and 4, which was NBC and CBS. And then if we, on a good night, depending on the weather and stuff like that, we'd get ABC on channel 7. And that was our TV. The house was built on a cement slab. Of course, it was a garage. And the interior walls were 1/2-inch plywood. The studs that were used to build the house were from a local sawmill. They were rough-cut 2x4s, unseasoned. And so when they pounded those 2 penny nails in, the 2x4s, when we tried to get it apart 30, 40 years later, you'd pull the heads right off the nails because they had annealed themselves to the studs inside the wall. Right? So that place is not going to go very far if any winds come along. This is my sister's family now, back 20 years ago. My brother-in-law's in the back, in the middle, underneath his oldest daughter. They had 6 kids. Right? They were a family at Fletcher Academy a few years ago down in North Carolina. My father was dean of men, and my sister cleaned the church and worked at Russell Stover Candies. So, yes, and they're all married in a way. Different. Jim, my brother-in-law, was a farm boy from Western New York. Next is my brother. He's the black sheep of the family. He made some really terrible choices in his life. He passed away here 6 years ago, I believe. 3 wives, 2 live-in girlfriends, children from 3 different women. But I loved him. He was my brother. Our first Thanksgiving that we had as a couple with my family was at his house. Have you ever seen Jerry Springer? We could have featured that Thanksgiving on Jerry Springer, because my brother was living with a girlfriend and his ex-wife came, and kids that didn't get along from two different people were there, and immediate arguments ensued and stuff like that until my brother cussed and swore and yelled, and finally everybody calmed down and we sat down to eat. So it was a pretty interesting introduction to that part of my family, to Amy. This next one was my first licensed vehicle. It was nicknamed a Bondo buggy, right? I bought it for $250. It had more Bondo practically weight-wise than metal in it, right? But that was my party vehicle that we come to know, and I took many rides in. And just to give you an idea, this is my family together here. As you can see, I come from the cultured side of town, right? That's my Uncle Fred there to the left next to me. I'm the furthest left next to my motorcycle, or not my motorcycle, but my van. Yeah, I turned into a very chubby kid before I joined the Air Force, and yeah. My grandfather and uncle next door owned 500 acres. We farmed 400 of it, and every summer we all got together. That's me on top. I'd come home from the Air Force, so I was a little bit more fit at this time. But that's my brother up there sitting on top next to, over in the end, and my brother-in-law standing in front, and his first 3 kids there up on top, the boys. Had 3 boys and then 3 girls. So then I joined the Air Force. Look at that baby face, man. And I had a unibrow, right? That was from the Rosler side. I had a unibrow. And in tech training in Denver, Colorado at the Air Force Base, I come in late one day. They knew I was going to be late. And they had put up on the front board a picture of they actually took a piece of electrical tape and formed it into like a center part of an eyebrow. And it said, new from Ronco, the unibrow for 1995. And I look around and every person in my unit there had a piece of tape between their eyebrows. They were making fun of me. But I always took it good. Anyways, that's gone now. Thanks to Amy, we learned how to wax. Get rid of it. Yeah. So after that, after the Air Force, I left and went back home to Jamestown, New York. As a child growing up, I didn't have any religion in my life. I didn't know anything of Christ. In our high school, or in our middle school, high school, we had what they called religion afternoon. On Wednesday afternoons in the public school, Wednesday afternoon at an hour and a half before the end of school, kids would go to their prospective churches with vans and buses, right? One thing that frustrates me as I look back on it is, I guess evangelism wasn't a part of their view because I was never asked to go, So I didn't have any religion or experience that in my life. My aunt was a Catholic, and she took me to a couple Christmas services, candlelight services, which it was all in Latin, so I didn't understand any of it anyways. My grandmother was a Methodist, and she took me to a couple Easter dinners, which was good food, but I didn't get anything really out of it. My mom had been raised a nominal Methodist, went once in a while. But to kind of give you a good perspective on my view of religion, when I was 11 years old, over my TV, my great aunt had painted a portrait of Jesus, and it was over my TV. And one day I asked my father, I said, at 11 years old, I said, "Who's that?" He goes, "Oh, that's your Uncle Jake." I said, "Uncle Jake?" He says, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, I've never seen him at the family reunion, so I don't know who he is. Well, about 2 years later, I was watching this cartoon, and it happened to be about Easter, and there was a cartoon of Jesus, and I looked up and I'm like, oh, okay, this is whoever that guy is. So that was my religious background. after the Air Force, well, actually during the Air Force, my parents called me and they told me that they were going to start going to church, that Saturday was the Sabbath, and that the Bible was true. I had no idea what the Sabbath meant at all. I understood the Bible because my grandmother had given me a Bible, a Living Word Bible. I'd read a little bit of it. I was told that by, news or whatever, media or whatever, I heard about the book of Revelation, and I read some of it about, monsters coming out of the sea and everything, and I kind of saw it like as Godzilla kind of a thing in my mind, until my father started deliberating a little bit on the phone about, oh, no, these are prophecies, these are things that are happening, and that sort of stuff. The person that was responsible was a deaconess at this church that we see a picture of here. Her name was Elsie Gebhard. She'd come to my father's shop because my father specialized in replacing car floors and car frames that were rusted out because of all the salt from the snow. And my father had been reading The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, and that was in the 80s. And he started to get some interest in prophecy. And so he starts talking to Elsie about end times. What do you think about the end times and that? And in her back window of her car, she had The Great Controversy. She gave it to my father. And my father sat down, good reader, right? Knew history. Started reading that. And what he did is he took The Late Great Planet Earth and The Great Controversy with the Bible in the middle. And he started studying. And he threw away the Late Great Planet Earth and got up one Sabbath morning. I was in the Air Force at the time. Got up one morning and told my mom, I'm going to church. And she joined him. And that's where it started, right? Great Controversy. So when I got out of the Air Force, I was pretty rebellious. And I want to say that the service is probably has more drugs available than even you can get out on the street. So I was well into drugs. I had hair down. After I got out of the Air Force for 6 months, actually 3 months before I got out of the Air Force, I had learned to wax my hair so it wouldn't touch my ears and stuff, and I could grow it longer and kind of fold it up and stuff and back. Everybody finds that interesting. But after that, I didn't shave or cut my hair for 6 months. My hair had grown down past my shoulders. I had like almost a ZZ Top beard, unshaven, right? And I wore a red headband, black leather jacket, had a chain wallet, had combat boots and jeans, and had a big poster of Bob Seger on my wall. And I said, I want to be like him. That was my goal, to be like Bob Seger, because he was like my motto at the time. So my parents asked me when I come back home to go to church with them, come to church. So I did. But in my mind, I represent all that's evil, and they represent all that's good. So I walked up to that front door of the church, and I stood there for a minute. My parents weren't there yet. And Paul, the head elder of the church, and along with his 3 kids at the time and his wife, came up to the door. He introduced himself to me. And if this is the doorway, and I'm Paul, I was standing here. He comes up to me and he pushes me into the corner of the door and he says, come on, kids, get in church. He was protecting his kids from me. I knew that. I saw through that. But there was this young lady, young girl, she was 14 years old. Her name was Becky Gent. And here I was 22 at the time. And so to me, she was the angelic person. She come up to me, she ran up to me, hugged me, said, Russ, it's so glad to see you here. I've heard so much about you. I couldn't wait to meet you, and so glad you're here to join us this morning. And I'm like, what is this girl hugging me for? Because I hadn't been hugged in a long time, at least for anything less than sensual, you know. And that really struck me, right? This young, innocent, angelic girl coming up, and I'm obviously not the best person in the world. Why would she hug me, you know? And then right after her, a 33-year-old man comes up and hugs me and tells me how glad he is to see me there. long story short, those two individuals end up giving me Bible studies and leading me to Christ. So, it was during those Bible studies that I lived in Jamestown. We had a party house that was known to the college students as well, and it wouldn't be uncommon in our little two-bedroom apartment to have 150 people in our home, in our apartment at night. And this one night, I was drunk, I was stoned, I was tripping, and I'd been going to church. And that night, a guy had jumped off our balcony onto another guy's car, smashed his windshield, was arrested. The police came to our place. Girls stuck out cigarettes on our carpet. People threw up in our kitchen. And I'm sitting there. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. We're playing cards, and this guy looks across from me. He says, "Man, isn't this great?" And it was like the Holy Spirit in that moment took my mind and drew me back, and I'm like, no, this is not great. And I don't want this for the rest of my life. You know? It was in that moment that God reached in and got my heart. And I decided to go and buy a home that my great aunt was selling. I bought a two-story, 1,600 square foot house for $8,000 in the city of Little Valley. It had 10-foot ceilings, with lath and plaster, old house and everything like that. I'm going to skip a lot here, but I felt the calling. I was baptized in June of that year, and I felt called. And I said, but I can't go unless I sell this house. It had been up for sale for 6 months because I decided to move anyways. And I had purchased close to $6,000 worth of materials for the house that I'd never even installed in. And so I'm studying with not only them, but a couple elders from the church. We now had a house study that we'd come to my house and study. And I said, let's pray that if God really wants me to go into some type of ministry, that he would sell this house. It was 2 days later. A gentleman with a cowboy hat walks up, knocks on the door. He says, I see this house is for sale. I said, yes. He says, how much? I said, $12,000. He goes back out, comes back in with a checkbook and writes out a $12,000 check. And he says, I want the house. So God answered prayer again. So I went to Heartland, down in Virginia, a self-supporting institute. And you can see I looked a little bit different there on the right, didn't I? Yes. I thought I was styling, really, you know. Anyways, I was strict veganism there, right? So I'd lost quite a bit of weight with that as well. It's good exercise. And I did need a little more meat on my body, though. There I joined a quartet. There I am on the left. And as we went to the first few churches, one lady happened to be visiting at one of our churches. She was a Presbyterian. She'd come up to us and says, could you please come to our church? We need some male voices in our choir. And so we went and we joined their choir. And the choir director was Unitarian. And so we were getting ready for Easter, and the choir director says, okay, everybody stand in a circle. So we all stood in a circle. Right? She says, now touch elbows. Okay, we're touching elbows. And she goes, now everybody hum the tone of the universe. So everybody's humming. As we're humming, she goes, now I want you to imagine all your dead loved ones up above you. We're looking down on you at this time. And I'm like, okay, this is really weird at the time. And yeah, that was interesting. That's when the guy standing next to me that was Presbyterian, he says, she's Unitarian. Anyways, a couple weeks later we had communion, and I'm like, he knows Adventist, and he says, I know you guys don't drink alcohol. He says, but they serve the choir grape juice, because there's several of us here that don't drink as well. I said, oh, okay. So, the usual thing, communion, okay, everybody. He goes, sorry. Sorry, it was alcohol. So the other three in my quartet had never tasted alcohol before in their lives. That was their first, first taste. Anyways, interesting things. Music has always been an important part of my life. When I was in sixth grade, I picked up the trumpet, and I can honestly say that the trumpet really did keep me out of a lot of trouble because it became a real passion of mine. And whenever I didn't have anything else to do, or even when I had other things to do, I would go play my trumpet. You know, it was very valuable to me. In fact, I won an award. Senior in high school, I won an award from the American Federation of Musicians, the best player in stage band in Western New York State. So, you know, I loved it. And then after that, I went to Al-Qaeda terrorist training camp. No. Yeah, that's me on the right there. No, this is just one of those meetings I went to. I decided to try a beard for once. It turned out pretty good, but somebody told me I look like a terrorist, so I said, okay. These two here, Pastor David Grams was the Bible instructor at Heartland at the time. And when there was a split at Heartland, he went to Detroit, Michigan to become a pastor. And he invited me to become a Bible worker in Detroit with him. So I stayed with him and his wife for almost a year, doing Bible work in Detroit, Michigan. Real blessing in my life. You know, God takes us through these different experiences, and he wants us to use them. He shapes us. He uses these experiences to reach others, and it's really fascinating, you know, when you look back and see how God has led. So, hold on. So, the church we raised up was called the Westland Church, and it's in Westland, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. So if you ever go there, that was, I actually had 32 Bible studies going on when I was there. And I tell you what, there's nothing like seeing the first person that you work with take the decision of baptism. You know? And I still remember him, Mike. He was kind of paraplegic. He worked for Ford Motor Company. And for 12 years, he's the one that designed the little gear in the transmission that ran the speedometer. That was, you know, that figured out the ratio that needed to be done so the speedometer would work properly. That was his job. And he had a car that he drove with all hand controls on it. You know, he could do that and stuff. Yeah. And in fact, this is, if you ever heard me talk about communion and an experience I had with him, it meant a lot to me and him. And that is, we were at church, and he'd been baptized, and we went to foot washing. And I saw that he was up there. I saw him crying. So I went up and I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Nobody can touch my feet. My feet are too sensitive. I can't do it." I said, "Oh, we don't need your feet." I said, "You mind if I wash your hands?" And he said, "You do that?" I said, "Yeah." So we went and had communion with foot washing with washing hands. And that was, you know, that was really special. So I went to Minnesota because they hired a lot of college students there at McNeil's Truck in Dodge Center, Minnesota. But when I got there, they were just laying off some people, so I couldn't work. So I went to Domino's Pizza in Rochester, and I worked for Domino's as a driver for about 3 months. And then McNeil's Steel, which is in the same city as McNeil's Truck. McNeil's Steel, in fact, the places up here get their steel from McNeil's Steel, from down in Dodge Center. And so I loaded trucks 12 hours a day. I averaged 75 pounds on my shoulder carrying it to the truck for 12 hours. Tell you what, first two weeks I thought I was going to die. And my shoulder felt like I'd been pounded with a meat cleaver. But you know, you learn how to switch shoulders because that was too much and go back forth. Anyways, I grew strong, healthy, and then after, I don't know, 6 months, they had an opening at McNeil's Truck, and I worked at McNeil's Truck for about a year and a half. Down in the bottom blue, with my hands on my legs. So, yeah, I was very healthy then. And right after that, I got hired by Jeff Jed to work in northern Wisconsin as a logger. I was a logger in northern Wisconsin, St. Croix, Wisconsin, for about a year and a half, slinging us off for 12 hours a day. And that, again, was another physical thing. I had neck muscles that I could go like this, and these neck muscles would just stretch out inside almost my shoulders. And yeah. So I learned a lot about hard work. I'd known hard work through my father, but my father always gave me a good work ethic, and I'm thankful for that as well. And in the same time is when I became a Sabbath school teacher in Rochester Church. And my pastor gave me a nickname of Spark Plug. He said, because you know how to get things going. You may not be able to run it all the time, but you know how to get things going. Right? And then one Sabbath, he introduced me as... By the way, this is Jehu. And I said, Jehu? Yep, can tell by your driving. I said, I had no idea. So I had to go home and look it up. And the verse is actually in your bulletin. It's inside. Somebody read it? So I was known for my driving even then. And if you've ever ridden with me, I apologize if I ever scare you. It was then also that I started a Friday night study group. This is them. The majority of them were either grad students from the Mayo Clinic, or they worked at IBM, a Big Blue in Rochester. The lady kneeling down at the left there is Trudy Smith. She's still a teacher, an Adventist teacher here in Minnesota. Now the one to the left of me, her name is Christine. She was a very good friend of mine, and she committed suicide not long after this picture was taken. She had been abused by her grandfather from age 5 to 15, and she was a church school teacher at the time. It's one of those tragedies in life, right? That happens. And 2 weeks after her suicide, I got a call from my parents that my brother was going to prison for sexually abusing his daughter for 10 years. So it's really hard to know how to deal with things like that with family. You know what that does in families and stuff. I actually had to take off of life, and I actually went home and lived with my parents for 3 months. At the time, I had been driving Rochester school bus going to college, Rochester Community College, and I worked at Denny's restaurant to help put myself through college. But yeah, that was one of those tragedy points in my life. After I was in Rochester for 7 years, and after this period of time, this study group one night, I said, I'm convicted that I need to continue my education, because I was no longer at Heartland. I had left Heartland and come up here to Rochester. And I said, I'm not sure what part of ministry I want to work with youth, and I have been studying for the ministry, but I'm not sure. I'm also thinking about teaching. And I want you guys to pray about it and come back next week with a thought or a review of what you think I should do. Well, I was purposely 15 minutes late for study that next week. And I walked in and they were all smiling. They said, it's crazy, but every one of us thinks that you should be a teacher. So, I went to Union College. Oh, before I went to Union, my pastor, hold on a second. Oh, that's why. Okay, let me back up. My pastor come to me this one summer and he says, you need to go to camp meeting. I said, I'm taking double classes in the summer and that's crazy. I said, I can't go. And he kept on. He says, I tell you what, we need you in a play. We'll make a cassette recording of your lines in that play, and you can play it on the way up and learn it. I'm like, okay, I can do that. Well, little did I know, Ben Saylor and Marilyn were also talking with Amy. The whole church was talking to Amy here about going down and being in a play. So I met somebody. And long story short, I was Adam and she was Eve in a play. And we met at the Garden of Eden. And well, one thing during the play, this one kid says, "Weren't they naked, Mommy?" Anyway, so it's I was hooked. I met her parents and family, mom and dad. We were engaged on New Year's Eve, 1995. It was 1994 until 1995. Get it? 2 minutes difference. So I do have to tell this story. No. Christmas Eve, the week before, I'd asked her to marry me. I took her up to the Toronto Tower in Niagara Falls and asked her to marry me, and she couldn't. She said no. And I found out afterwards it was because she wanted her father's permission. Well, what she didn't know is that up there in the Toronto Tower, I took all the change I had, and I called her dad at home and asked for her hand. And he said yes. But yep, New Year's Eve, next week. So we were married August 6, 1995. That's me and my family at the wedding. Right here. It's right here, right standing where I'm standing right now. And you can see I'm the tallest one in the family. There's the wedding party. And my extended family. My brother and sister, there are 6 kids. And then it was on to complete college at Union College. One of the things I was privileged to do is travel with the orchestra, and we went to Peru, where we had 15 concerts in 13 days. And that's me on top of Huayna Picchu, looking over Machu Picchu, the Inca ruins down below. What a privilege to be able to go see these places. My first teaching assignment was in Tulsa Adventist Academy, down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we were members of the Claremore Church, where Amy taught the young people. One of the friendliest churches I've ever been to in my life. I hope we can reflect that here. And threw this picture in to say, look, no gray hair. And then this happened. So Caleb was born. At the same time, we were leaving Tulsa to go to Maryland, for me teaching in Maryland. I taught at Eastern Shore Junior Academy in Maryland for 12 years. There's our school that we had. My principal at the time, my principal at the time is Pam Consuegra. She's now the Associate Director of Family Ministries for the North America Division. But another small story here. You ever heard of Gary Smalley? He gives great marriage counseling and stuff like this. And he takes the 4 personality types and he puts them into animals. Right? You got the lion, you got the otter, you got the beaver, and you got the golden retriever. Right? Well, Pam here was definite lion. She was in control. She knew what she wanted. She had some OCD too. I did some jokes on her a lot. But anyways, so the math teacher that we had, he was what they call an otter. He was the fun-loving, gregarious sort of guy that went around. Well, we took a trip to I believe it was the zoo in D.C. And on the way back, I get back earlier than him. On the way back, she says, where's Tracy at? And I said, he's a little bit behind me. Well, then she gets a call from one of the parents. Tracy had picked up a hitchhiker. on the way from D.C. with the kids in the car, right? And the parent was not happy. And I heard her talking about it, and she turns to me and I'm smiling. She says, "What are you smiling about?" I said, "I'm picturing a lion eating an otter." So yeah, so then we moved from there to our new home. New life in Maryland. Yes, I need to back up one second. Caleb's personality was that he was an organizer. Ever since he was a kid, he organized his Hot Wheel cars, he organized his shoes, he organized everything, right? And then there was Sarah, our hairless girl. That's how we tell the age of her pictures, by how much hair she has. We didn't think she was going to have hair for a while. She was the happiest little girl and an explorer. We had to cage her in at night. We had to put a screen over her thing because she would get out and sometimes get outside even. We had to tie her on the leash during the day sometimes because otherwise she might find herself out in the road or whatever. She was an explorer. She ate dirt. That's what she got there. She got dirt all over her face. Right? She ate dirt, she climbed trees, and she rolled in the mud. That's the girl that she was. Right? She, in her high chair, one thing that was fascinating is that when she got tall enough, she could reach up to the tray and pull herself up and over into the seat because she had such upper body strength. And she was a talker. They were quite the pair. Right. Caleb and Sarah. My mother died of cancer in 2005. In August of 2005, just 3 weeks before Katrina. And our school at the time, one of the things that I vowed to do as a teacher was every other year to take my students on a mission trip. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to do that. And so we had planned to go to Honduras. And if you've ever been in a fundraiser for school kids, it takes a while. Like 9 months to a year ahead of time, you had to plan and start doing fundraisers and stuff. One of the kids, we had just started, like maybe 2 weeks into it, fundraising. And one of the kids said, "Why don't we go help out at Katrina?" And I sent home a letter that night and got an overwhelming response from the parents and people. And in 2.5 weeks, right, oh, hold on. Hurricane Katrina was a powerful and devastating tropical cyclone that caused 1,392 deaths and damages estimated over $125 billion in August. Here's a picture of an outcrop of New Orleans before and after. Right? The devastation of that wave that came in was just incredible. So we put out the news to the churches, and in 2 weeks, we had $25,000 and 27 people, including, you see the guy there on the left, that kneeling, far left? He's not even Adventist. He might be now, I don't know. But he called us up and he said, "I heard you're going." He says, "I've got a Bobcat." He said, "I've got some clearing equipment. I want to bring my truck and my trailer down and help out." So he joined us. We had another person from locally that came and said, "I've got a trailer that I'm filling up with food and stuff." All the churches gave money, and they give us 3 brand new chainsaws and shovels and stuff. And so when we went down, they were so glad to see us because most of the people had been dropped off by bus, didn't have equipment or anything to do, and so they had to figure out what to do, how they could help. But we had everything we needed. We were able immediately to go in and help people, which was a wonderful thing. So the interesting thing there is that the shore, we were in Westland, Mississippi, that got the brunt of it. On the shore there, the wave that actually hit was 35 feet tall. And they said it was over 180 miles an hour, the wave that hit. So for about a quarter of a mile up the beach, there's nothing where there was houses and stuff. There's just complete devastation. This is actually a little bit farther up where there's still some building materials and stuff. But this was about a half a mile up in, there was a railroad tracks that were 10 feet tall, and they acted like a breaker. Right? But the unfortunate thing is, everybody north of that breaker, this was a retirement town. Everything north of that breaker was considered in a flood zone, and so they couldn't get insurance. Right? They could not get flood insurance. So these houses were devastated completely, right? And the ones on the other side of the tracks were moved off their foundations, or some of them were destroyed, but most of them were just moved or displaced. And because of the warnings, everybody had moved north. Immediately after Katrina, it was 105 degrees for the next 4 days. So you know what happened in those houses? Mold. They had to condemn the majority of the houses because of mold. And I drove up, parked at this one place, and I heard this weeping happening, and I went in this lady in this, she was probably 60 years old. She said, I said, what's going on? She says, this is my house. They won't allow me in it, and they've got to condemn it. She says, my husband died last year, and we put our entire retirement into this house. That's all I have. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So pretty devastating. And I could offer a prayer, but not much more. But those are the tracks behind this house that was moved upshore. My house is gone, but I still love Waveland, Mississippi, was written on one, right? And it says, we are all okay. The EMTs had went through all the standing houses and found bodies and everything, and so they had markings on the outside, 8 to, designating what they found in the house. Right? Now, whoops. I know I'm a little long here, but this is a story I have to tell you. When we went down there, I took the kids down to an area where there's like a dip, where it just so happened that all the stuff that had been pushed up the coast had piled in. And so what they went through with bulldozers and backhoes, and they had cleared the road. And so there was between like 10 and 15 feet of debris, where you had like pillows and stuffed animals and kitchen sinks and cars and stuff just all stacked up on top of one another. And the smell of death. And we drove down through there. I drove there with the kids, and I looking out from the house. Now I got to tell you, I used to hate cats. I couldn't stand cats. At this time, I still couldn't stand cats. But out from this debris comes this cat, and it had been 2 weeks since everything had happened. And this cat, you could literally see the ribs. You could count the ribs on it. And it was losing hair. And I may have hated cats, but I didn't want to see anything suffer. So the Red Cross had went around to the volunteers and given out sandwiches. And a lot of them had ham, cheese sandwiches, which we didn't eat ham. So I told the kids, let's collect the meat off them, even if we don't eat them, because somebody might be able to use it, or so we did. And sure enough, I went back in the van and said, kids, give me some, nobody come out. This cat looks like it's, got something wrong with it, but give me some of that meat. So they did. And I went out there, and the cat was like 10 feet from me, and I knelt down and I threw out the ham. And that cat went over, sniffed the meat, and ran right straight over to me and curled around my leg and started purring. And I thought, it's always hard for me to talk about this. I thought, more than food, that cat had been loved by people, and it wanted affection more than it wanted food, right? That was a God lesson for me. Anyways, so then we had, after Katrina, we had Anna. She loved her daddy, but she was independent and particular. Now, one thing that I always remember is that, kids growing up, they say the word wrong, like say some word wrong, and you repeat it to them, and they usually just walk away, like whatever you said, whatever. But she would look up at you and she'd repeat it, and then you repeat it again, and she'd repeat it until she got it right. I'm like, okay, she's particular. She wants to know how to say the word right. Very vivid imagination. Uh, so we lived a half an hour from the beach there in Delaware, and this is our family. Every summer, Amy and the kids would visit her home, take kids up there to visit, because they didn't want to be around me during the last couple weeks of school, because I was up all night long preparing and all this stuff. And we've always had animals. There's our chicken coop that we had there in Delaware, and Anna with her 3 ducks. You can tell she's pretty happy with it. Sarah's always the rescuer. I can remember she was like 4 or 5 years old, and she comes in the house after a rainstorm. She's got worms in her hand. She goes, the worms, you got to save the worms. I'm like, okay, we'll save the worms. And then we had our faithful pet, Laddie. It was a rescue dog. Really just quiet. Knew I didn't like animals, but this dog got my heart. She would come up to me. She wouldn't touch me. She would lay down next to me when I was working. She would just sit there, faithful. My father passed away in 2007. One thing is that it was just a couple months after Anna was born, and we went up to see him. He had been comatose, basically, because of cancer for a couple months, and we went up there just to see him. And sure enough, he didn't wake up. And we went out to lunch, and I said, "What do? We might as well just go home. Let's go see him one more time." We walked in. He's sitting up, vivid, cohesive. "Oh, wow, is that Anna? Oh, bring her here, let me hold her." Right? And the nurse said, "That's a miracle." that he woke up for that. That was amazing. My former principal, the last principal, we were there for 12 years. My former principal was arrested for sexually abusing 2 of our students. And he's now still serving 35 years in prison for what happened. It devastated the school, it devastated us, it devastated his family. And it's one of the reasons we're here. Got a call from Tiffany wanting to know if we'd start a school up here. Amy's dad passed away in 2011. We moved to Minnesota in 2013, where this is all the reconstruction that happened next door. All the people that helped out to make it a reality, open a school. Yeah, just head in the back there. Dr. Bray, Marvin. Some are no longer with us. They died or moved or left. And that gym that we put up, that outdoor gym, we had that big, huge windstorm. It blew it up, blew it away. Yeah. And then our church. In 2019, I had an accident, had a concussion playing racquetball with my children. The family left. We didn't and Dr. Bray was going downhill with what did he have? What was it? A stroke? Did he have it? He had a stroke there. And so financially we couldn't support the school any longer. That was in 2019. And then 2020 we had a pandemic come in. And unfortunately we had a controversy in our church where many people left. Got down to 3 people coming to church at one time. But we're faithful, and God is faithful, and He's bringing everybody back. All right? He's filling the church again. God is leading. 2 Corinthians 4:16-18 says, "For this reason we never become discouraged. Even though our physical being is gradually decaying, yet our spiritual being is renewed day by day. And this small and temporary trouble we suffer will bring us tremendous and eternal glory, much greater than the trouble. For we fix our attention not on things that are seen, but on things that are unseen. What can be seen lasts only for a time, but what cannot be seen lasts forever. And the story continues, right? Jesus is coming back soon.